Okay. That's it. All right. Prendiste el aire. Mami, prendiste el aire. Ok. Okay. Wow, Mr. Roberts there. Excuse me. Oh shit, excuse me. Let me see something about that. Okay.
Hey, Jason, how's it going here, sir? How are you? Can you hear me? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's all right. So, you've been hitting up a lot of the classes?
Yeah, I missed yesterday.
Okay,
But I've been going. I think I went already 3 classes so far from last week.
good, good. How do you feel about it? How's it going for you?
It's a lot of stuff. It's pretty cool. You know, all the teachers have different ways of teaching and stuff like that. You and I forget her name, Kristen. You guys have like a real dynamic way of teaching. The other gentleman, I'm getting used to his style of teaching too. So everyone's different.
Yeah, and then we got another woman, Patricia. She taught last night.
Last night, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
good.
missed yesterday, but
And have you been, so please make sure if you haven't done it, make sure you're keeping a log of all your classes.
I've been keeping the hours. Do I have
Yeah.
to write the date too,
Yeah,
or
you got to write the date and the time you were in from the time you were out. Like, if you came in at, if you're not,
oh,
if like, let's make pretend you came in at 10:20, you got to
yeah,
write down what time you came in and what time you came out and what date. So, because remember, so at the end of when you're like almost ready, I'm going to be like, all right, Jason, you're going to be like, hey, how do I take the final exam? Right?
okay.
I'm
Oh,
the
I
first,
see.
yeah. Hey, how's it going here, Justin?
Hi, Rob.
How you doing? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, well, send me over a log of the classes you came to, and it has to have the date and the time you came in and the time you left. You could write down what unit if you want to, but you really don't have to. I don't really don't, doesn't really
Yeah, I
make,
already have. It was Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from
yeah.
last week, so that's where I'm
So
at
yeah,
so
just keep
far.
a good little log. So when the time comes, right, you're going to be in. Now, so that way there's no problems with it in the long run, right?
Okay.
All right. So now, good morning, Jody Ann. How's it going?
Excuse me.
Uh,
Good
how's-
morning. Good so far. It's a beautiful day.
yes,
So,
it is. It's very nice out.
how
So
are you doing?
you're the first person to ask me that today. So hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for asking. Right? I know it seems like I
Nice.
walk around all day asking people, "Hi, how's it going? What are you up to?" But not a lot of people ask me, but when they do, then I start giving them real answers, Jody. And so you don't want to ask me because, it's not going to be on the surface talk. I'm going to say, oh, my back's hurting on this side a little bit over here. And, I could use a couple, maybe an extra 60, 70 grand so I could put in an in-ground pool. But besides that, I probably should get it here because some people are saying, but I really don't want to. I'm going to tell the truth. So
Oh, that's a lot. You don't want no one to ask you.
it's funny though, because that's kind of so, this goes off track on things, but that's a sales. And I do appreciate you asking me because I know you came from a level of sincerity. So with that in mind, though, it is, for those of you that are thinking you're going to get into real estate sales, right? In the sales position, don't ask people how they're doing because you don't care. Like most people, you call up, hey, Ron, this is Rob Rosa. So how's it going today? And right away, when you hear that from a sales call, what are you like? Forget it. You just turn off, right? So it's interesting though, using that stuff, right? Using those terms when you're talking in sales. What do you do regularly, Jody Ann?
So, I work with people with disability. Um,
Okay.
I'm like a disability nurse, DSP.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, I'm a New York realtor. So, I connect with people still in New York, even though I'm here in Connecticut.
Very good. So that's awesome stuff, huh? So so you're out there doing real estate in Connecticut, I mean in New York right now. And then when you ask people how you feeling, how you doing, then that's like for real because you need to know really how they're feeling and how they're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
You probably got to put it in your notes and stuff like that for work, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. So does anybody remember on who came to class on Friday? Did you actually do Unit 6 transfer of title? Or does anybody not know or not know or what? You did?
I hope so. We did that last night too.
Yeah, yeah. Last night, I know so what happens is every about 3 months, it starts overlapping. I try my best to keep it separate so that somebody can come through all the classes all week long and not have them overlap. But now this is the week where it does overlap. So we could handle this a couple of different ways. It will be this class that will have the big change. And it's totally up to the three of you, right? So we can continue on this track, but for a few weeks, it starts ending up happening that the morning and the evening classes are doing about the same stuff, which usually doesn't work out the great for people who want to do different stuff. So what I usually do is I say, okay, now it's time, let's go 10 units ahead. So we would just be like, all right, let's do unit 16 today. And then on Friday, you would do unit 17. And then on, and so forth and so on. So do you guys want to do that? Even though you didn't get a chance to study it? What do you think? The three of you.
I
So I
don't
did,
usually attend during the week, so I'll let you guys make that decision. I was just trying to get an extra credit point here while I had some time.
Yeah. Well, I know Justin and Jason, I know you've been coming to evening classes. So you're going to be
yeah,
like doubling up on the same material, which is not the
yeah,
best.
that's fine. I got no problem with that. Whatever you want to do.
Are you okay with that, Jody Ann?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine with me too.
All right. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to pull up the book. I
But
just
I'm
had it.
almost done. So
You're
that's
ready to roll, huh? All right.
yes.
Yeah, you're almost done. Come on. All right. So I'm opening up the yellow book and I'm just going to say, okay, today we're going to do unit 16, which is real estate appraisal, which we're probably only going to get through about 2/3 of it. And then on Friday, I think Trisha will be teaching this Friday. If you don't know Trisha, she's one of our other new instructors. She'll probably finish up 16 and start on 17. Okay, does that sound okay to all of you?
Sounds good to me.
All right, and so it's kind of one of those units that it's not really. There's a lot there, of course, but it's not complicated where you had to make sure that you read before, otherwise you're going to be totally lost. All right. So that's where we're at, Jason. Unit 16, real estate appraisal in the yellow book, right? So in the yellow book, we're going to talk about the appraisal concepts and the process employed by the appraiser. We're going to differentiate between value and price. We're going to talk about the three approaches to value, right? We're going to talk about accrued depreciation, anticipation, appraisal, um, gross multiplier information, and all that sort of thing. So let me see here. You just got to give me a moment. I want to try a couple of things here, my friends. 1 second. So let's see here. Speaker, pen, and then let's see here. One more thing I gotta try to do. Share. Just give me a moment. I'll be with you in 1 second. One moment. All right. So today, what we are going to be going over is appraisal. Okay. And when we talk about appraisal, like we discussed, appraisal is a distinct area of specialization when it comes to the world of real estate professionals, right? Most real estate transactions, they require an appraisal, not all, right? So most of the time, of course, if you're borrowing money, you will definitely need an appraiser. At the same time, if you're paying in cash, most of the time, you won't need necessarily an appraisal. It will just totally depend on what the situation is and are you borrowing money or not. And so you want to make sure that if an appraisal is needed, it is done by a licensed or certified real estate appraiser to provide a clear understanding of the market's response to a subject property. Okay. We also have to be aware as real estate agents of the fundamental principles of value in order to make sure that we are completing an accurate and effective CMA or comparative market analysis, right? And these comparative market analysis, what they do is they assist sellers in arriving at a reasonable asking price, right? We want to make sure that we are asking for someone to buy a home at a reasonable price, that we're actually going to be able to sell it. Because what help is it to tell them, oh, your house is worth $550,000 when it's really where the comparables are only showing 450,000. And so we go through all the exercise and then we find out, hey, we can't have a closing because no one is going to let them borrow the money based on the $550,000. So that's a very, very important way to kind of look at it. You know, of course, from a seller's side, everyone wants to sell their home at the most money possible, right? We understand that. But if we don't get to the closing table, well, what's the difference? It's just kind of like even the stock market. If you haven't sold if you had stock from the past year and 2 and 3 and 4 years, but you haven't sold it yet, have you really lost money? You don't really lose money until you sell it. So the same thing with appraisers, with appraisals. You can say your house is worth anything you want to, but if you're not doing a seller refinance, if you're not selling it, if you are not making some sort of financial actions, conveying it, gifting it, what is really the difference of what you say the value is at this very moment? Now, is also such a thing called a BPO, and that's a broker's price opinion. It's a lot less expensive than an appraisal, and it might be requested by a lender when the property is refinanced or sometimes when the property goes into foreclosure. And those are things that I had done, you know, for quite a few years, but in many cases now it's just not, they do not pay enough, meaning the lenders or the asset management companies, to really make it worth my particular time and value. If it's something that you want to get involved in sometime in the future, maybe you can. All right. So appraising, what is an appraising? Well, an appraisal is an opinion of value. So that's important. There's no science exact, you know, that it's a black and white type of thing. It's an opinion of value, but it's based on supportable evidence and approved methods. So this is not to disparage appraisers at all, because they are very, very important in the process. At the same time, the truth of the matter is you could get one appraiser for a property to give you a number, and then a day later, get a second appraiser. They're going to give you a different number, and get a third appraiser, and they're going to give you a different number. Okay. But it's an opinion of value based on supportable evidence and approved methods. Okay. Now, an appraisal report is an opinion of market value on a property given to a lender or client. Okay, so they're going to take a look when an appraiser does the report, they're going to take a look at the market conditions, the features of the subject property, the comparable properties in the neighborhood, maybe recent sales and listings, land value, current construction cost, all the elements that a lender wants to consider in determining whether or not to make a loan and accept the property as security for the debt. So remember, when a lender is giving you money, they are accepting the property as security for the debt. Does that make sense to everyone? All right.
Question for you.
Yes.
If you pay cash for the house, and technically there's no lender, so they don't require an inspection. What about or an appraisal? What about homeowners insurance?
Oh, well, remember, homeowners insurance in many cases, they usually don't go by the appraisal. They're usually going to go by either the purchase amount, or maybe they have their own system that gives them a computerized market value, or they're going to go by the market value and assessed value in the town records. So I can't tell, I know that they have different systems that they work on, but I can't give you an exact, what exactly an insurance person does in order to determine how much your house is worth. A lot of times I have done
Okay.
CMAs or BPOs for insurance people as well. Right. And so that is a good point. For instance, let's just say in the town records, your home shows to have 4,000 square feet, an in-ground pool, and something, very expensive like, I don't know, central air conditioning. But maybe you bought the house and the in-ground pool was removed. Maybe you really walked through the home and you realize it's really only 3,300 square feet. And let's just say that instead of the central air, let's say it shows in the town record that your lower level is heated, right? Now, all those things will make your taxes go up. So in many cases, you will want to have a real estate broker, someone like myself, do a market analysis for you with all the features of the home that you can actually go to the town and discuss with them and show them that, hey, listen, my house is not worth 550,000. I should not be paying taxes based upon a market value of 550. I no longer have the in-ground pool. The square footage is wrong, and my lower level is not heated any longer because it was removed years ago before I bought the place. And so you could actually make an appeal on your taxes so that you pay lower taxes. So I know, Justin, you were mainly talking about insurance, but in this particular case, I just mentioned it happens with your taxes as well. So it is good to have an understanding about the features of your home and what you're paying for taxes and why you're paying those certain amount of taxes.
Okay.
Make sense
Hey,
to
Rob.
everyone?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good. Good.
I was just gonna say, I know when I think we took a HELOC out or applied for a HELOC, an appraiser came out, but that was at the bank's expense. So I would assume it would be at the insurance's expense if they wanted to do a separate appraisal.
Yeah, so most of the time they won't pay for it. They're not going to pay the $500. At least I don't see that happen most of the time. What I see happen is they'll tell the homeowner to get a market analysis done, or maybe once in a great while, I'll see like a broker pricing opinion being done, but that's about it. Which is, you
Yeah,
can
thanks.
pay like $100 for that. All right, very good. Any other questions? All right. So remember, an appraiser, well, what's an appraiser? An independent professional trained to provide what we say is an unbiased opinion of value in an impartial and objective manner. and they have to follow, or they're supposed to be following, an identified appraisal process, right? Appraising, it's a professional service being performed for a fee. And it would be a breach of accepted practice and ethics to collect a commission for an appraisal based upon the property or the value of the property being appraised. So that, we want to make sure that we understand that there are safeguards against there being fraudulent appraisals. The first one is the Dodd-Frank Act, right? So the Dodd-Frank Act required changes in the Truth in Lending Act. So that's TILA, TILA. You want to remember that. Truth in Lending Act and other legislation to prohibit the coercion and other activities that influenced appraisals in many cases of fraud, right? So, who knows how, at that time, mortgage lenders, they used to be able to talk directly to the appraisers. Buyers would be talking directly to those appraisers. So if you think about it, well, who knows what conversations were had? Now, in today's world, many lenders, the loan officer never talks to the appraiser. They put the order through. It might go directly to that lender or that bank. And if it's a bank in many cases, or lender, they might have a third party like an asset management company, who will then initiate. They keep a list of approved appraisers who will then initiate those appraisers, and order the appraisals. But remember, that's a third party. So that's one more party that needs to get paid. In many cases, a lot of appraisers found themselves getting paid a lot less per appraisal because they have to share that money. Or in some cases, the price of the appraisal actually went up.
When
Okay.
did that start?
Well, that was really kind of somewhere around like 2006, 2007,
Really?
2010,
I
really is
thought it
when
was.
really things kind of got put in place between the Fannie Mae appraiser independence requirements and then the Dodd-Frank Act. That was all like right after that mortgage crisis.
Well, we always had to order our own appraiser, connect with the appraiser, make sure it was there. That's
Yep.
what I'm thinking. Was it after 2008 or?
Were you a loan officer?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was after 2008 because I was even helping people with loans from 2000 to 2005, give or take. And we used to talk directly with the appraiser and be like, hey, here's what's going on, and I need you to go do an appraisal over here as
Yep.
soon as you can and let me know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I will tell you, and this is not to disparage appraisers at all. They're very much appreciated in the work that we do, okay, as real estate agents. Now, with that in mind, the appraisers, they get a copy of the purchase and sale agreement. So it's not like they're shooting in the dark. And we know the honest to God's truth is that if you are always coming in too low, where the lender doesn't want to give the money, or you're always coming in way too high where it just doesn't make sense to the lender, that lender might take you off their list. It might not make sense if there's too many disparities every single time you do an appraisal. They might not want that person. So to me, yes, the value is there. It's important that they do it, and we need it. At the same time, they know where they need to be. So it's not 100% kind of like, hey, let me start at zero. Let me go look at these houses and I'll come up with this magic number that's somehow right at the purchase price or within $1,000 higher or $500 higher, $2,000 higher. It's kind of interesting if we're being 100% truthful. But I do not want to disparage appraisers in any way. All right. So, with that in mind, any other questions before we keep moving forward? All right. So if you're going to be taking that state exam and talking about appraisals, one of the things is the regulation of appraisal activities. So there's what's called Title 11 of the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989. And so in your book, it'll show you FIRREA. Okay, requires that any appraisal used in connection with a federally related transaction be performed by a competent individual who is licensed or certified by the state. Okay, in which the appraiser practices. So that's important to make sure that you understand that, you know, every state now has an appraiser licensing agency, which is required by the FIRREA to be separate from the agency that licenses real estate professionals. Okay. And a federal related transaction. So examples of federally related transactions, what are those going to be? Those are going to be FHA, CHAFA, USDA, VA, right? Those are all examples of federally or federal real estate related transactions. Okay, when it comes to all those, in which there's a federal or a federal financial institution engaged in the situation, right, involving maybe the lease, the purchase, the investment of a property. Okay, they have to make sure that they are doing an appraisal of residential properties that are valued at $400,000 or less, believe it or not, are exempt. Now, I can tell you, I don't know of any lenders that are like, all right, well, you know what? We don't have to do an appraisal for this property because it's $400,000 or less, right? That's not happening, what I see, my friends. Now, if you've seen that happening, you let me know. I think that's pretty interesting, but I don't see that happening. All right. So let's take a look at the actual, right, at the actual documentation here, right? What they're saying here is that appraisals of residential property valued at $400,000 or less are exempt and need not be performed by licensed or certified appraisers. Non-residential properties valued at $500,000 require a certified appraiser. So, I mean, they might be meaning that, hey, you know, you could use an apprentice, you can use someone that's on their way to become certified. But ultimately, I know that the lenders that we use, they want a certified appraisal done. Okay. So that sometimes kind of like your difference between real life and the yellow book, right? Meaning the modern practices of real estate. So let me ask you, who has questions about this? Anyone?
Yeah, I got a question. Just how it's written when it states non-residential properties over 500K require a certified appraiser. Why does it just assume that 400K or more will also require a certified appraiser?
I believe so, yeah. I
Yeah,
think
it's
that's
just
pretty much how it's worded and why.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Now, remember, there are some limited exceptions to the appraisal requirements. Okay, so for example, what we're talking about here is that Fannie Mae will not require a new appraisal for limited cash out financing when the borrower and the lender are the same and the original appraisal was performed no more than 12 months earlier. Okay, so as an example, if someone is doing a cash out financing where maybe they did it like 12 months ago, right? And they're basically just trying to take money out of the equity so that they can put in that in-ground pool. They can redo the kitchen, they can redo the boiler, they can redo the electricity. Okay, So that would be an example of there.
Hey,
Okay.
Rob, I wanted to ask you, so let's say I did an appraisal for like a building so it's good for like a year, pretty much, if I wanted to do like a cash out.
Well, in this particular case, what they're saying is that if it's a federal related loan, that they can use that same appraisal. Now, remember, if it's a conventional loan, we're talking about something totally, totally different. Has nothing
Right.
to do with this,
Okay.
right? But if it's something where there was like we said, a USDA, a VA type of
FHA,
thing,
VA.
then you know that, hey, listen, that's how long the loan is good, that appraisal is good for.
Okay.
Okay, makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. Now, also, given that the many properties that have had appraisals entered into Fannie Mae's collateral underwriter database. So there's what's called a collateral underwriter database, a CU database. Some loans purchased by Fannie Mae are eligible for a property inspection waiver. Okay. Property inspection waiver. Right now, I can tell you this is a little bit misleading because we're not talking about a home inspection where you invite an inspector. Okay. Because remember, you can buy a home without an inspection. People do it all the time. We don't necessarily recommend it in most cases. In some cases, we're like, hey, listen, if you're coming up against 20 other agents or 20 other offers and you love this home enough and you know about homes and you see that there's a family living in there and the electricity and the heat and the hot water, it all looks like it's working well, and you can tell the home is well maintained and they have receipts, or maybe they even have a previous inspection, and you decide that you want to waive an inspection, that's between the buyer and the seller. What we're talking about here when it says property inspection waiver is we're talking about actually not having to do an appraisal, where basically they will almost do what they call like a computerized market analysis, right? Like they'll take what comes up on the computer. Make sense to everyone? All
So,
right.
Rob, is there two differences, having a property inspection versus an appraisal?
Oh yeah, so remember, let's just talk about the typical real estate transaction. So in the typical real estate transaction, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a purchase and sale agreement that's been signed, and there's going to be contingencies in that purchase and sale agreement. Okay. Now, well, what are some of the contingencies? Well, the first one might be that the buyer is going to do an inspection. As simple as that, that the buyer's going to do an inspection, right? So that's a home inspection that is done by a licensed home inspector, has nothing to do with appraisal. They might tell you, well, this is broken, that's broken, and so forth. And then the buyer can determine if they want to still move forward with the sale, if they have questions about the sale of buying this property, how long the boiler might last, how long the roof might last, are there termites, are there wood destroying insects, and all that kind of good stuff. So that would be one contingency that many, many buyers will have, which makes sense. Now, on the second part of things is you might also have a mortgage commitment letter contingency. And kind of in many cases, it's not black and white, but in a weird roundabout way, it's kind of included in there that the property is going to appraise. Some lawyers might disagree with that, some might not. And that's why sometimes we do an appraisal rider, right? But basically, this appraisal, if someone's getting a loan from from a lender that's going to collateralize their home, right? That lender is going to ask for an appraisal to be done. Some buyers might think, oh, well, they're doing it for me because they want to make sure they really like me and they want to make sure that I'm buying a house that's worth it. No, they're doing it for them to make sure that when they lend you the money, the house is worth it. Okay. They want to make sure that what they're collateralizing is going to make sense for them to give you the money. So anyways, and things have changed a lot over the last, I'd just say, let's just say since 2010. So in the last 15 years, things have changed. Before then, I mean, I'd see appraisers come through the home and they'd look at a few things, but the main goal was to make sure that they understood that, okay, there's supposed to be a kitchen, so there's a kitchen here, and here's a picture of a kitchen. There's supposed to be 2 bathrooms. Here's the picture of the 2 bathrooms with the fixtures. There's supposed to be 3 bedrooms. Here's the pictures of the 3 bedrooms. And they kind of would go through homes for the most part pretty darn quick and move on and do an appraisal. Well, now in today's world, right? They kind of do a little, and it's not for the buyer necessarily directly. They'll do almost like a little inspection where you might have heard, okay, if I get a first time home buyer's loan, which, that's not such a thing. That's kind of a marketing spin on things. But let's just say you're going to get an FHA loan, right? FHA insured loan or VA loan or USDA loan. These are all federal related loans. Well, that appraiser is going to have to fill out almost like an inspection document or make sure they make note of rotted wood. Is there chipped paint? I mean, even for a conventional loan, which this is crazy, I'm not sure if the lender or somebody's playing games with us or even the appraiser, but someone we have right now a transaction with a multifamily where the house is in pretty decent condition. There's little things here and there, but the appraiser noted that there's a broken window on the second floor. Now, we're not talking a broken window where there's like jagged glass and it's huge danger. There's like a couple of cracks in this broken window. And is that important? Yes. I'm not trying to say it's not important, but is that important enough to make sure the underwriter knows it and for now the seller's on point to replace the window, which it was supposed to be an as-is transaction, which it was supposed to be that the seller gave the buyer such a huge discount to close quick as is conventional loan. And now we're having to get somebody out there. The closing's on hold, being delayed because we have to replace a second floor window. So sometimes these things get a little bit unreasonable, in my opinion. But anyways, that's an example of a property inspection waiver. They might want to make sure that, hey, or a property inspection. They might want to make sure the roof has a useful life. And sometimes I've heard from the appraisers 3 years, and sometimes I've heard 5 years. And sometimes we have discussions, and we've had appraisers come in this class, and we kind of it's hard to nail it down exactly what they're looking for and what are the useful lives, because I think it's almost different per lender. And so that's the whole thing about an appraiser doing some sort of property inspection. It's a long answer, my friend, but what do you think? What kind of questions do you have on that?
Rob, I wanted to ask you, okay, so I wanted to make sure in my thinking, if it goes hand in hand, what would come first and what would come second. So if I'm looking into purchasing a property and, I want to make sure the property's foundation is fine and, make sure that there's no big issues, then I would do an inspection. Okay. I'm thinking that the appraisals, more or less, you're doing comps, research on the value. If you did some renovations, what comes first? What really comes first?
Well, the people who want to try to say, well, like somebody who wants to try to say, well, I'm looking out for my clients, so we always do the inspection first.
Okay.
Right? Now, before they spend the $500 on doing the appraisal.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on the surface, that might sound like, you're being such a great person for your buyer, and that makes sense. Okay. But what if, and this is why I'm going to tell you there's no correct answer. What if you and your buyer you're nervous, or maybe even the seller, you're nervous about the appraisal, not the inspection. You look at the home, everything looks great, and you're like, man, you know what? We should just pretty much get this appraisal done before we spend the $700 or $800 on an inspection. Because what's the sense of doing an inspection if the property doesn't appraise at the offering price that we're giving them?
Oh,
So to me, it's like you have to look at it differently in each individual case. Don't the worst thing that I see is people try to get on their high horse because they say something and do it the way that it sounds great, but then it
yeah.
doesn't make sense to really help their client, right? For example, is we had somebody who is going to buy a short sale. Okay. Well, when it comes to a short sale, you sometimes are waiting. I've had people wait a year and a half for the lender to approve the short sale. So why would we even want to spend any money on doing an inspection within 10 days and get an appraisal done within 2, 3 weeks if the lender isn't going to approve it right away, or maybe not at all? I mean, there's been some cases where someone is going to buy a short sale, a home. A short sale is a home that is being sold for less than what is owed, right? And then sometimes the lender doesn't even approve it. So if you don't do things the smart way and the right way, you could have your buyer spend, let's just say, $700 for an inspection, $500 for an appraisal. There's another $1,200. And then 3 months later, the lender does not approve the short sale. And now your buyer's going to look at you and like, dude, you just made me waste $1,200. This is a scam, right? So you have to look of the strategy about what's going on with this transaction. How is this going to help my client the most? What makes the most sense of how to do it?
So you can get funding from a lender without, excuse me, having the appraisal done or the inspection?
No, so remember, when we're talking about short sale, we're talking about the lender of the seller. Because for a short sale, the lender of the seller has to approve the short sale, that lender of the seller, the lien holder of the seller, because it doesn't always have to be a lender, the lien holder of the seller is willing to take less than what is owed on the property. So once again, let's just make pretend somebody bought a property, they didn't take care of it, they bought it at a bad time, they bought it for too much money, all these crazy things happen, the roof or a pipe bursted, they didn't fix the pipe on time. So anyways, let's just make pretend they bought the home for 400,000. All these repairs and damages are needed. And so let's just say they have a loan for 380,000, but now the house, they've had it on the market, can't get offers more than 300,000. So they owe 380. They can't get more than 300. They've had tons of offers. It's been out there. People are not willing to pay that amount of money because it needs like $100,000 worth of work. So now the seller's like, well, I can't take this anymore and I need to leave. And so they go to their lien holder and they say, hey, I know I owe you 380, but I'm only getting offers for 300 because of all these repairs, all these problems with the house. Will you accept 300,000? So now that we're talking about a short sale, that lender for the seller, right? They're going to say, well, let me see your pay stubs. Let me see your tax returns. Let me see your bank statements. And they want to make sure that this seller is not scamming them, that maybe the seller has all kinds of money before they just forgive $80,000 worth of money that's owed to them. And sometimes it could take like a year and a half, 2 years. And I've had people that they have waited a year, year and a half, and the lender's like, nope, we're not approving it. So as a buyer of that home, you made an offer You know, why are you going to do all these things and invest time and energy and money into the home when the seller or the lender hasn't even approved with the seller to get that short sale approved? Make sense? Pretty crazy, right? All right. Anybody have any questions on that? All right. So let's keep on moving forward. You know, when it comes to appraiser qualifications, now there's all different types of state licensing certification criteria for appraisers to conform to. They have the AQB, the Appraiser Qualifications Board, right? And then they have the Appraisal Foundation, a not-for-profit organization, right? And when conducting an appraiser must follow the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice, which is USPAP, right? Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. And that was established by the Appraisal Standards Board of the Appraisal Foundation. The AQB, they meet regularly to review and make recommendations for changes, maybe the level of education and experience. So one of the things you're going to notice, now remember, right now we're talking generally speaking. And so probably later today, or in our next class, we're actually going to go through the requirements for the state of Connecticut appraisers. And I can tell you it's pretty impressive. And that's why there's probably not enough appraisers out there. Right now, inventory is very, very low when it comes to the state of Connecticut or most of the state. And so because of that, we have less transactions. But if we were having the same transactions that we were having 5-6 years ago, we don't have enough appraisers. Right? I mean, to be straightforward, and don't get me wrong, I am not passing judgment, but to be a real estate agent, you have to do 60 hours of classroom time and take a state exam. Right? To be a certified appraiser, you're talking over 3,000 hours of experience. Pretty big difference, right? So, anyways, that's the whole thing about the Appraisal Foundation Board giving voluntary guidance to appraisers, regulators, and users of appraisal services on recognized valuation methods and techniques for all valuation disciplines. And it's pretty interesting. I mean, I've taken a couple appraisal courses. Here's a couple of the websites for people who are interested that want to go to those websites and so forth. Now, most appraisers, they are going to work as independent contractors, but some are also employees and some are employed by public agencies. There's all different types of trade associations. And some of the largest ones are the American Society of Appraisers, American Society of Farm Managers, Appraisal Institute, and all that type of stuff. And so here's all the links to those. Now let's talk a little bit about the wonderful CMA. Okay. Now, when we talk about CMAs, we're talking about comparative market analysis. And most of the time, it's real estate professionals who are preparing a market analysis for a seller or a buyer. And in fact, I think it's crazy. You know, here I am, in some cases, I'm the seller agent. And in some cases, I'm the buyer agent. Well, when I'm a seller's agent and someone makes an offer, and you can tell they did not do a CMA for the buyer, because I know they're making an offer on this particular home at such a high price, there's no comps for that. So the first thing I go back to them and I say to them, you know, I talk to my seller, and my seller a lot of times will say, well, what are we going to do if it doesn't appraise? And I've talked about this in some of my other videos. What are we going to do if it doesn't appraise? I go back to the buyer and I say to the buyer's agent, hey, is your buyer willing to offer any appraisal gap coverage? And then that's when they in some cases, or a lot of cases, they actually get defensive. Well, you're the one who priced it at this price. Did you get any comps? And then I have to go back to them and say, well, I priced it at this price. And I know your buyers really wanted it. So you guys came in $50,000 higher. I didn't come in $50,000 higher. So why would we take that offer $50,000 higher when we know that there's a great probability that it's not going to appraise? And in some cases, we're able to work it out, and in some cases, we're not. And it kind of shows me the ignorance or immaturity or lack of experience and knowledge by a lot of other agents and how they are leading their buyers. Because what's the sense, once again, if there's hardly a chance, there's like a 95% chance this is not going to go through, especially when you're talking about in condo complexes. Because you have a maybe you have 100 units in this condo complex and you see 4 of them have sold in the last 6 months in this range, right? So how are you going to expect that an appraiser is going to say it's acceptable at this price range? Right? It just isn't going to happen. I can tell you, there's a 5% chance it'll happen, and if the seller and the buyer want to go through that, great. But it's not going to be on me, the real estate professional, giving them advice to take a long shot. They're the boss if they want to do it, but in many cases, it becomes a real long shot. And then in 3, 4, 5 weeks, when the appraiser comes in and you're having negotiations and you still can't make it happen, the whole transaction falls apart and you have to start off at zero. I've had that happen to me because the seller saw that number, even though I'm showing him, listen, the buyers, here's where the houses are selling at, and the buyer's not willing to do any appraisal gap coverage. Are you sure you want to take that offer? Yeah, but it's such a good offer. Yeah, but it's probably not going to close. Isn't it better to take an offer that maybe is about here, give or take, and is willing to give you a higher deposit and is willing to put more money down and has better criteria and actually have a closing in 4 or 5 weeks like you want to? So anyways, my friends, that is the whole thing of what we're running into in many cases. So remember, a CMA, a comparative market analysis, is definitely different than an appraisal report. And I can tell you this, and it's going to sound like I'm biased. There's not one that's better than the other. Some people might think, yeah, but an appraisal report, that's what the house is really worth. Well, let me give you an example. Appraisal is going to go off of their methods that they have to go through, right? I'm going to look at the hope of the future. So maybe last night, maybe you have this house, this 3-family house, or this whatever, this property that's right at the edge of this commercial area. And last night I went to one of the town meetings that was open to the public, and I found out that they're going to put a Walmart right there. And so now all those properties around that Walmart, those parcels on this busy street, they're going to be worth a lot more. So you see, I'm looking in the future. I'm not looking at today. I'm going to tell you, hey, listen, if I was you, I would take this property and put it on the market for $150,000 more because, this has a lot of land and somebody can maybe put a Dunkin' Donuts right next to it. Somebody could put a Dunkin' Donuts right on your property, right next to the Walmart. And I'm just using a kind of a crazy example. But you see, I'm looking in the future of what's going on in the market. You might tell me, hey, Rob, give me a CMA because I'm thinking about selling in September. Well, September is 5 months from now, 4 months, 4.5 months from now, right? Technically, what is it? 4 months and 3 days from now. Well, that would be a much different price that I would tell you to put it on the market for than if you said, "Hey, Rob, you know what? I need to sell this property today. I already missed 4 mortgage payments and I received a Liz pendants and they're going to foreclose on me. Can you give me a CMA to show me what I should put this property on the market today for?" Those are things that appraisers don't do necessarily. They're just looking to say, okay, in a market where there's no duress or where the property has no duress, where it's this, and this, what is the property worth? They're going to give you something different. So do you kind of see the differences between an appraisal report and a CMA? Does it make sense to you? Okay. So the CMA is going to focus on properties similar to the subject property in size, location, amenities for the purpose of deriving a likely listing price or offering price. We're not exactly saying here's what the property is worth. We're saying let's get a likely listing price or offering price based on closed properties. Now, those are the properties I use the most, or properties currently on the market, because yes, that's your competition. And I mean, it does tell you here properties that did not sell, but I don't really like to or love to use them for my CMAs because I feel like, there's a reason it didn't sell. I mean, we can use as examples, but not in determining really, in my opinion, what should be the offering. So that's a CMA, a comparative market analysis. Now, broker's price opinion, a less expensive alternative for evaluating property, often used by lenders working with home equity lines, refinancing, portfolio management, loss mitigation, and collections. So, although some BPOs are more extensive, including information about the neighborhood and an interior analysis, many are simply drive-bys that verify the existence of the property. So there's some BPO companies, there's companies that do these for lenders, and sometimes they're going to give you $25 and sometimes they're going to give you $75. Okay. But there turns out to be, in my opinion, a lot more work than what you actually sign up for because they're going to ask you for disparities and say, well, what about this and what about that? So a BPO should not be confused with an appraisal. An appraisal is definitely more in-depth analysis of gathered information, which may be performed only by a licensed or certified appraiser. A BPA cannot be used if the matter involves a federally related transaction. And once again, when we say federally related, we're talking about a USDA loan, a VA loan, an FHA loan, and so forth. Okay. Um, and so this gives you a little bit more information about the BPO. So does anybody have any questions about the differences between appraisals and comparative market analysis and broker price opinions? All right. So, the wonderful world of the appraisal process. So, the key to an accurate appraisal lies in the methodical collection and analysis of data. The appraisal process is an orderly set of procedures used to collect and analyze data to arrive at a justifiable opinion of value. The value sought most often is market value, right? That's what we're looking for. Though an appraisal can also be made to determine a different value, which you, Justin, had mentioned, such as a property's insurance value or salvage value, or what I was talking about when taxes, assessment value. Okay, so the data needed by the appraiser can be provided in 2 basic classes. General data, number 1, that's going to cover the nation, region, city, and neighborhood. The appraiser researches the physical economic, social, and political influences that affect the value and potential of the subject property. So that's general data. And then number two is specific data. So remember, number two is specific to that property. What's the type of property? What are the features of the improvements to the subject property, as well as comparables that are similar? So you have the general data. It's going to say, hey, what's going on in the nation, the region, the city, the neighborhood. It's going to talk about the physical, economic, social, political influences, and so forth. And then number two, you have specific data, which is specific to that property. Okay, so we're going to show you in a few minutes the steps an appraiser takes in carrying out an appraisal assignment. And once the approaches have been reconciled and an opinion of value has been reached, the appraiser prepares a report for the client. So remember, everything we're going over here today, I want to make sure you know I am not an appraiser. But this is part of the curriculum that the state of Connecticut wants you to learn when it comes to getting your real estate license. So this is the unit on appraisal. So we're going to go by what it says here in the yellow book. But I can almost promise you that if you are an appraiser right now, or you go to be an appraiser, or you talk to a friend or family member that is an appraiser, that they're going to say, oh, that's not true. This guy, ROB ROSA, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't even know why he's teaching you that. Because I have to, because it's with the state. Just like if the appraisers had a book or a unit on what real estate agents do, what real estate brokers do or are supposed to do, I'd probably be like, well, that's not right. And that part's not right. So, that's the interesting part about this. All right. So here we go. When the appraiser prepares a report for the client, the report should identify the real estate and real property being appraised. So remember, when we talk about real property, we're talking about the could be the buildings on there, the improvements, maybe it's the utilities and so forth. Maybe it's even the bundle of legal rights and what it says on the deed. All right. Is it a life estate? And so forth. Are there easements? Are there encumbrances on the property? It should state the purpose and intended use of the appraisal. So is the appraisal because of a purchase agreement? Is it for a refinance? Is it because of a divorce case? Is it because of someone who passed away for probate? What's the reason for it? Okay. What's define the value sought? What's the effective date of the value and of the report? What is the extent of process that they use to collect, confirm, and report the data? What are the assumptions and limiting conditions that they use, right? What approaches have they used? And we're going to talk about some of the different approaches that are used when doing an appraisal, depending on the type of property and so forth. We're going to describe the information used. We're going to describe the appraiser's opinion of the highest and best use of the real estate. We're going to describe any additional information that might be appropriate to show with the specific guidelines established in USPAP, right? And we're going to even have the signed certification as required by USPAP. So here you go. Remember, they're going to define the problem. What is it? Is it for divorce, a purchase, a refinance, probate? And I'm sure there's a bunch of a foreclosure, right? So what is it for? What's the scope of the work? What you need to remember is general data, national, region, city, neighborhood, and then specific data. What is specific to that particular property? As far as right? What's specific to that particular property as far as what improvements are made, what features are on the property, and then the data for each approach. Is it, and we're going to talk about these approaches in a few minutes, is it the sales approach, the cost approach, the income and expense data, and so forth, okay? Then they're going to form an opinion of value by each of the approaches, reconcile values, and then report it. Make sense to everyone? All right. So we talked about a little bit about the USPAP. Well, this one is a little different. Remember, USPAP is about the procedures. Now, the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, the URAR, is a form that they use to have the detailed information when you're in appraising a residential property. And it also has all the list of the certifications of the appraiser and so forth. Okay. And so they pretty much use software to do this quicker, simpler, easier, and they can send things along electronically with copies of any exhibits that are needed, such as maps and photos. Okay. Now, what they want you to remember is while the appraiser does not determine value, neither is value determined by what the seller wants to receive, what the buyer wants to pay, or what the real estate professional suggests. Okay. The appraiser, relying on experience and expertise in valuation theories, develops an objective report that supports the value indicated by the market. Sellers and real estate professionals may not agree with the appraiser's value. That happens sometimes, right? And we may argue that it is lower than what we think it should be. That happens sometimes. Of course it does. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I don't even know how they got up that high. And sometimes I'm like, man, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. The value should be a lot higher, and I have comps to support that. So we will, we kind of argue one way, but then other times we figure, man, we dodged a bullet on that way. Okay. So since the appraisal is most often ordered by a lender, who will make a loan decision based on the property's appraised value? The appraiser must be able to back the appraisal report with quantifiable data. It is the lender who will want to know, hey, if there is a loan default, at what price can the property probably be sold to recover the remaining loan balance? So that's what they're looking at. And the lender is relying on the skill of the appraiser to answer this question. So does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions about that? All right, so here's the example of the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report. You can see here, this is page number 1. And really when it comes down to it, they're going to have a lot of information like the property address, the parcel number, and so forth. And you see the black column all the way to the left? You see that's the subject, right? So the property, you see how it says subject? Are you still with me? Right? So you see the property that is being appraised is the subject property. So they're going to put down all kinds of information about the subject property. All right. And then the second area is the contract. Well, there you go. The appraiser does get a copy of the contract and understands what is the contract price. What's the date of the contract? Is the property seller the owner of public record? Are there any financial assistance, loan charges, sale concessions, gifts, down payment assistance that are being paid? So they're going to know all that stuff. That's the second section in this page 1. Now, the third section is the neighborhood section. And that tells them, that's kind of like, do you remember what section that is? That's the general data. Okay. That's the general data. They're going to talk about neighborhood characteristics, 1-unit housing trends, present land use, neighborhood boundaries, neighborhood description. The next section is the site. And the next section after that is the improvements. You know, for instance, how many units is it? What year was it built? Does it have an attic? Does it have a foundation? And what kind of foundation? Concrete slab or full basement? Does it have an outside entry or exit? Who doesn't love a house with a walkout basement? Man, you know, I never had a house with a walkout. I'm not talking about a hatchway. I always thought it was cool that you have a walkout basement. So, like, if you had a big party, picnic, barbecue, whatever you want to call it, and you had friends and family over, well, maybe it starts raining or they need to use the bathroom, they're able to just go into the walkout basement area, and maybe there's a beautiful room there and there's a bathroom there and so forth. I always loved a walkout basement. All right. What kind of heating does it have? I mean, I went to a house yesterday. Was it yesterday? Day before. Day before. Beautiful high efficiency heating system. A couple months back, I was in a house with a geothermal heating system, heating and air conditioning system. They don't even call it heating system, a geothermal climate system, which is pretty cool. What's the exterior like? What kind of roof is it? I mean, some of these homes now have metal roofs or a slate roof. Man, those are definitely have to be expensive. Does the house, I mean, we were in a beautiful home in Torrington, and this house, I mean, it was like a kind of a mansion type of house. The house didn't have any gutters. And wouldn't you know, it didn't have gutters, and we go in the basement and there's water and there's dampness in the basement. So, wouldn't you believe that? I mean, come on. This is New England, my friends. Make sure you have gutters and downspouts and even extensions on your house, because when we get that snow and that rain, you don't want it to just come right back into the foundation and into the house, along the foundation and into the house. What types of amenities, the interior, so anyways, that's the improvements of all the house. And that is page 1. Now, page 2, you see, starts off with the whole thing about doing the comparables. Okay. And when we talk about these comparables, remember, you always have, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, you always have the subject, right? You have the subject, and then you have the comparable 1, comparable 2, comparable 3. And if you notice, well, you're going to have to do what they call adjustments. If you're an appraiser, you're going to know that you're going to do adjustments. So what might be an example of an adjustment? Well, let's just say the subject has 3 bedrooms. And you know that this house is really close. Maybe everything is just like this house, but this comparable, they took a couple of bedrooms and made it into 1. So now the comparable doesn't have 3 bedrooms. It only has 2 bedrooms. Okay. So you, as an appraiser, would have to do an adjustment to the comparable. So the adjustment is going to be a plus. So they might have a book that says, okay, an extra bedroom, or each bedroom is worth an average, and we're just going to make this up, of $25,000. So under comparable sale 1, you would put 2 bedrooms and adjustment $25,000 plus. So does that make sense to everyone? You always adjust to the subject. Let's do another example. The subject property has 1 bathroom. Subject property has 1 bathroom. Well, this house is almost just like it, but it has 2 bathrooms. The comparable has 2 bathrooms. And they figure out, well, you know, a bathroom is worth $15,000 of value. We just made that up. So under description, it would put 1 bathroom for the subject, 2 bathrooms for the comparable, and the adjustment would be a minus $12,000. Okay, so remember, as you learn about this, is that the comparable always adjusts to the subject. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? And if you look at this column all the way to the side here in black, it says sales comparison approach. So when we do, and this is most of the time what we will use for residential properties, what appraisers will use is the sales comparison approach. So that's page 2. And then on the bottom, they also have the reconciliation. And if you see there, there's the 3 approaches. It says indicated value by sales comparison approach, cost approach if they did it, and income approach. Now, cost approach is going to be those properties that are special use. So it might be a library, a school, a hospital, a church. Properties that really don't generate revenue necessarily. Okay. And then income approach is going to be those properties that generate revenue. Could be a 5-unit apartment building, maybe even a 2, 3, 4-unit apartment building. Could be commercial building. Could be mixed use. Could be 100 units. Okay, but that's going to be what the approach that they'll use most of the time for income producing properties. So those are the 3 approaches: sales comparison approach, cost approach, and the wonderful world of the income approach. Any questions on that? All right, my friend. So that's page 2. Page 3, you see here additional comments, and here's the breakdown of, if you look on the left-hand side, cost approach. Okay, when we're going to go through this in a little bit as well, they will want the appraiser in some cases to figure out the difference between reproduction or replacement. Okay, so when we talk about reproduction, we're talking about, let's just in your mind right now, you think about the most beautiful building in your town. Let's think of like the most beautiful church that you know of in your town. Okay, take a quick break here. Well, that most beautiful building in your town, it might have gorgeous marble steps in the front with these huge marble columns. And that marble came from Italy. Okay, so I'm Italian. I'm going to brag about the Italian marble. But then you also walk into this church and they have these beautiful wooden pews, and they're not composite, meaning like they weren't put together from different pieces. They're like made from one long, huge maple trees, and they're stained a beautiful color, and that maple wood came from Canada. And then you look up at the windows, and it has this absolutely incredible stained glass that was made in France, I'm just going to say. And I'm kind of just making this up as we go along. Okay. Now, maybe, God forbid, there was a big fire in that church. Well, reproducing that church, just like they did with the Church of Notre Dame, could be millions of dollars, because you have to go to Italy and get the same marble, and Canada and get the same wood, that maybe those trees are, there's not a lot of those big maple 200-year-old trees left, and you have to go to France to the same place that made this stained glass, and maybe there's only 1 company or 2 companies left in France that do this for these special churches. And the story can go on and on. We see that reproduction, that could cost you a lot of money. So they're going to try, if that's what the lender wants you to do, or the lien holder, or who's ever ordering the appraiser, right? That's what they might want done. But replacement might be, okay, this church is 15,000 square feet, has a big auditorium area with 300 seats, and it has 2 offices, a kitchen area, and I don't know, another reception area. So replacement is like, okay, let me go see how much it would be to replace this building. And it could be like you can get a big metal building, right? You can get some big building in a warehouse that has 15,000 square feet, that has an you can make an auditorium for 300 seats, and you can have 2 offices, a kitchen area, and a reception area. And so you can see the difference, and that's part of the cost approach between estimating whether they want the reproduction cost or the replacement cost. Okay. And remember, that does not include the land. The land is always different. And then as we get into this deeper later in this class, we're also, when we talk about the cost approach, and you can see that in this section where it says opinion of value of site. If you go down, it says dwelling, garage, total estimate of cost new, less physical, functional, or external depreciation. So we're going to talk about those in the class in a little bit. And then underneath here, we have the income approach. And, maybe some cases they're going to talk about the monthly market rent. They're going to talk about the gross rent multiplier. Maybe they're going to talk about, well, how much is the property after all of his expenses, not including the mortgage or debt service. Because remember, the mortgage or debt service does not increase or decrease value. And each person who was to own an income producing property is going to have a different kind of debt service or none at all. You might own this property straight up in cash. God bless you. Right? Maybe I have debt on the property that's 75% of my of what it's worth is debt. It still doesn't change the value. Okay. And then if it's a PUD, they would want to know, okay, well, what's PUD information? Do you have planned unit development? So that would be, that's basically page 3. The next page 4 pretty much has all the information about the PUDs and scope of work and intended use and of the overall definitions, assumptions, and conditions of this appraisal is page 4. And then page 5 is the appraiser certification, right? And so they're going to certify and agree that they've done 1, 2, 3, 4. Um, they've performed a complete visual inspection of the property. They did everything in accordance with the requirements of USPAP, the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Right? They develop their opinion of the market value of the real property that is the subject of this report on the sales comparison approach to value. Number 5, they researched, verified, analyzed, and reported on any current agreement for the sale of the subject property, right? Any offering for sale of the subject property in the 12 months prior. So, a lot of times when people put a property back on the market and then they actually get a purchase and sale agreement for it, I'll get phone calls from appraisers asking me, hey, so tell me about the sale. What were the rents like? Maybe if it's a multifamily, or were there any concessions that weren't listed in the MLS? Like, sometimes the seller is going to give a seller credit because it needs this or this or this. And I'll try to work with appraisers because I do appreciate the service that they do. And we want to keep things under a good working environment, right? And we know that the more we help others, hopefully, our life is easier for when we need help. Number 6, research, verified, analyzed, and reported on the prior sales. Number 7 and 8. And so you don't have to know all these exactly for the state exam, but know that, hey, there is page 5 is the appraiser certification, and it goes even out to page 6. And then it talks about a supervisory appraiser certification, which a lot of times, they're going to have apprentices types of people helping them or doing the appraisal, and then they'll have a supervisor, and then the appraiser with their certification, with their licensing and so forth. They're going to have all their information there, and the supervisor there. All right. So that's pretty much the uniform residential appraisal report. Anybody have any questions on that?
Make a uniform commercial inspection report or
Well,
appraisal report.
most of the time, I see this exact document. Just like for closings, when we talk about the closing documents, the HUD for the closing documents, it's like they don't have to use that for commercial, but they do. Now, I haven't sold a skyscraper, but I can tell you that I have sold, like I said, some plazas and restaurants and gas station and mixed use. And most of the time, I pretty much see that similar document.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. So in this unit, they decided, which I think it used to be in a different unit years ago. Um, but it kind of makes sense, I think, to be in this unit, is they decided to put in here the section of differentiating between value and price, because there is a difference between value and price, and when it comes down to value, it's really important to understand, well, what does that mean in real estate? Okay. So to have value in the real estate market, that is monetary worth based on desirability, right? Monetary worth based on desirability. A property must have the following characteristics, which can be remembered as DUST. So DUST is the acronym, all right, that you have to remember for the state exam. And so the first one, when we talk about DUST, we're talking about demand, the need or desire for possession or ownership, backed by the financial means to satisfy that need. Okay, so demand is the need or desire for possession backed by the financial means, because you might not have a lot of demand if the property cannot be financed, right? Or, I mean, when you think about it right now, what's the demand for office space in central Connecticut? There's not really huge amounts of demand. How many of you know someone that desperately needs this new 2, 3, 4, 5,000 square foot office space? And if they desperately need it, well, guess what? There's plenty of it around. Okay, so demand. The next one for under dust is utility, the property's usefulness for its intended purposes. So, have you ever been in a property and maybe it just doesn't feel right? Like an example, um, someone takes a 3-family home, and on the first floor, they have a little bodega, they have a little store. And, it's like a little 1,000 square foot, 900 square foot store. People are in and out of it, but it's not really a great place for a store. And it's not like it's going to make it's not the best use for it. And so that might be considered utility. What's the property's usefulness? Because it was intended to have 3 apartments. And instead, they took the first floor and made that into a store. Scarcity is the third one, a finite supply, right? That affects its monetary worth based on desirability. So, like as an example, why is property so expensive in Manhattan or waterfront property or on any of these metropolitan Georgetown and Washington and Boston and so forth? Because even though I drive, even in Connecticut, I drive down these country roads and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all this land. And don't get me wrong, I love nature, right? But I grew up here in East Hartford, and there's some nature. I mean, right across the street from me over here, I have the Connecticut River and so forth. And I love nature, but I'm also like, wow, man, there's still so much property available. Okay. But there is only so much waterfront property. There's only so much property available in Manhattan. There's only so much property available in Boston and so forth, or along a beautiful lake in Litchfield County. There's only so many lots, right? And so you look at that and be like, wow, that does affect the value because there's only a few lots. And then the last one is transferability. The relative ease with which ownership rights are transferred from one person to another. Okay. So if you have a lot of liens on the property, can you sell it? Yes. Okay. In most cases, you can still sell the property with liens. And in a lot of cases, those liens have to be paid off. Sometimes they don't. But does it affect the ease? Yes. Right. The more liens or encumbrances or easements and so forth and shared driveway. And I did have someone that they wanted to buy this property and they found out that the town had an easement to get to the back of it for a drainage, and right away they said, forget it, we don't want to buy it. And I said to them, okay, I'm not trying to talk you into it. That's not my gig, right? That's not how I do things. I just want to make it clear, we're really talking about like 3 feet, 4 feet in the back corner that they might want to go to a couple of times a year to make sure that the drain is clear. They're like, yeah, forget it. And I said, okay. So we went and looked at, 11 more properties and made an offer on a different property. But those things do make an impact on some people. The characteristics of value: demand, utility, scarcity, and transferability. All right, now let's talk about the different types of value, because there's a difference between appraised value, market value, assessed value, right? So the goal of an appraiser most often is to estimate or express an opinion of a property's market value. So market value generally is considered the most probable price that a property should bring in a competitive and open market under all conditions requisite to a fair sale. Okay? The most probable price, competitive market. So if you sell a property straight up to your brother or sister, is that usually going to be market value? No. If you tell me, Rob, I am 4 months behind on my mortgage and I need to sell this baby quick, please, Rob. I do not want to have any problems and get sued and have them take any money out of my bank account and so forth. I just want to be done with this. Is that market value? Probably not, right? This is the most probable price that a property should bring in a competitive and open market. Now, the buyer and the seller are both assumed to be acting prudently and knowledgeably, and the price is not affected by undue stimulus. And that's what we're talking about, undue stimulus, right? It's not because, hey, we need to sell this now and we're going through divorce. We need to sell this now because they're starting a foreclosure. The property's most probable price is not the average price or the highest price possible. Okay? Because in some cases, the highest price possible means that you wait and wait and wait until you get that buyer that's willing to pay. And I've had some properties that the seller didn't really care about selling unless he got his price. I have to say it, because I'm getting to be one of those people, but it's usually those old guys, those old men. They're like, I don't care. I just want my price. And if I don't get it, I'm not selling it. Are you willing to deal with me, Rob? And I'm like, let's do it. Let's try. Let's go for it. I'm going to spend a bunch of time and money. Are you willing to respect me for that? Okay. And when houses are selling on average in 5 weeks and we wait 5 months, but they get their price, they love me for that. because they know that I don't give up on getting them the highest price possible. So even if you're thinking, hey, Rob, I want to sell my house next year, let's talk about selling it now. Well, Rob, doesn't days on market affect the price? No, it will affect maybe the public perception, but we don't care about the whole public. People are going to call me up and they're going to say, "Hey, Rob, how come it's been on the market for so long?" And I'm going to explain to them all the features and beautiful things about the house, and then ultimately they get over that. So here's the determination of market value. Requires that the buyer and seller are unrelated and acting without undue pressure. The buyer and seller are well informed of the property's use and potential, including both its defects and advantages. See, to get the true market value, there cannot be any secrets and surprises. It's not like we have to tell them every little thing like, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but on the bottom of the trim work, there's a scratch. You know, I don't know if you noticed, but that screen window in the living room, the screen is ripped. No, we're talking about important things, right? That there's no major defects. And everyone knows that, hey, maybe you can subdivide the property, or you can build a big garage, or you have ledge. And if you want to put in if you want to update the well, it's going to cost you another 20 grand, or, you know, there has to be a septic that has to be pumped out and that costs another 20 grand. There has to be a reasonable amount of time allowed for exposure of the property in the open market. So like I keep saying, the whole thing about technically in a lot of cases, we call it a fire sale. If someone needs to do a fire sale, it might not get the market value because they need to sell right away. Someone who says, listen, I can't afford 2 mortgages. So I need to make sure that I sell this property quick so I can buy that property in Old Saybrook or Old Lyme that I really love. Okay? That might not get them market value for the property they want to sell. It will require that payment is made in cash or its equivalent. Yes, its equivalent is a loan. Okay? Market value requires that payment is made in cash or its equivalent. What if someone says, well, I'm only going to be able to, I'm only going to sell this property if somebody trades in their, I don't know, their big camper, that, what is it, one of those RVs, right? You're probably not going to get market value. I mean, you get some kind of weird people who say things, well, I'm only going to sell this house if I can do this or get that. And then you start talking about, well, does it really make sense? Because you're probably not going to get market value. And a determination of market value thus requires that the price paid for the property is a normal market price, unaffected by special financing amounts or terms, fees, costs, and so forth in the transaction. So this last one we haven't seen in a while here in Connecticut. If you're like, well, what does that mean, Rob? I don't get it. Okay. Well, what that mainly means is that the price paid for is a normal price. So years ago, back in the olden days, we used to have these big subdivisions being built here in Connecticut. And like I said, maybe there are some right now that I don't know about, because it's not like I know every single one of the what do we have, 6,000 properties in Connecticut on the market right now? I believe it's 6,000. I just went through the numbers yesterday. Okay, so I don't know of every single one, but back in the days when we used to have a big subdivision, okay, let's just say someone has a subdivision with 40 homes on the market, and they need to sell all these properties for about $500,000. Okay, say about 40 houses on the market, they need to sell all of them for about 500,000. Well, now maybe since they built these houses, the market has changed a little bit. The market's slower for these kinds of homes in this particular area. You know, maybe a big corporation moved, or they said they were going to come to this area and then they didn't, right? Well, the point is now maybe this person, they sold 3, 4, 5 of them. Now they have about 35 more to sell. Well, usually if they negotiate upon the sales price, that's public record, right? The sales price is public record. The purchase price is public record. So if somebody sees that, oh wow, well they bought theirs for 475. I want to buy mine for 470, and the next person 460, 450, 430, and the story goes on. That's going to hurt the sales of the remaining 35. Every single time it's going to go down probably. People are going to be trying to get more lower pricing. So instead, what some of these big developers or builders will do is they'll say, hey, the price is 510,000. I can't help you with that. That's what it is. But what I'm willing to do is I can put in high-end hardwood floors. I can put in gourmet appliances. Would that make it worth it for you? I can get you 1 year special financing, interest only at 3%. I can give you a 25,000. I know you want to buy it for 480. So I'll tell you what I'll do. And I need to get 510. I'll give you $30,000 seller credit. Right? In this particular way or another, where it doesn't show up as public record. So once again, market price is the normal market price unaffected by special financing terms, service fees, costs, or credits. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So you see the difference here between market value and market price. Market value is an opinion of value based on an analysis of data, an opinion of value. Okay. Market price is the property sales price. That's how much it's sold for. So value is an opinion, price is the sales price. All right. Now, one of the most common misconceptions about valuing property is that its cost represents its market value. Don't do it, my friends. We have some of these sellers, they have such an emotional tie to their home. Right. And even as real estate agents, you have to be that person to say, hey, listen, you have to be courageous enough. And sometimes it's hard for me to do, but you have to do it, is you have to explain to them, hey, I know you absolutely love all this expensive stained glass work you've done around your house. And it does look beautiful to me, but it doesn't necessarily make your house worth that much more. And in fact, one of the things I talked about with my real estate team yesterday is return on your investment. Anybody know what is the highest return for a small improvement to a home? Do you know what the highest improvement or highest return on investment for a small improvement to your home is?
I think the roof.
It would
Bathrooms.
sound that way. It would sound, right? Roof is important, right?
Windows, maybe.
So what the data shows, right? What the data shows is your front door.
Front door. Wow.
Your front door, I think in that report, shows it to be in the 90s as far as percentage of return on investment. Kitchens are in the low 80s. So you're like, well, before I sell my house, I want to redo my kitchen. Some sellers will tell you. And I say to them, are you doing it? Or are you actually paying someone for the materials, costs, and labor? Oh, yeah, I hired this company. It's going to cost me $27,000 to redo my kitchen. So my house is going to be worth $20,000 more, right? And I'm like, no, it's probably only going to be worth maybe, depending on how good of a job they do, 80 to 85% of that we can add to the value of the house. Bathrooms are in the 70s, right? Swimming pool might not be any, depending. In a lot of cases, It will help the real estate agent maybe sell it faster or easier, but it's not necessarily going to be that you can add that monetary value to your house. Like, think about it this way. Having a new roof is great, right? But also having a roof that has 10 years of usage on it is fine too. When it costs you money is when the roof leaks, right? But it doesn't mean like, wow, I just spent $18,000 on this new roof, so my house is worth $18,000 more. All right. So anyways, cost and market value may be the same, but not always. In fact, when the improvements on a property are new, cost and value might be equal, but more often cost does not equal market value. And so they give you the example here in your book about a homeowner may install a swimming pool for $30,000. However, the cost of the improvement may not add $30,000, and that's usually the case. All right. So be careful when you come across that, like, hey, listen, here's the truth. And that's important to make sure that sellers understand the truth. It's better, and especially in today's market, which is a hot market, you're better off just putting the house on the market right now, the way that it is. I mean, do some things that might help it a little bit, like, some curb appeal with landscaping might not cost a lot of money, might be things you can do yourself, right? Because of course, we're not talking about things you can do yourself. If you're a roofer and you can put on the roof on your house for, just the cost of materials or a little bit of labor, then it's worth it. If you're a contractor, you know how to do a bathroom or kitchen, you're going to do it yourself, then it's probably worth it to do it. But if you're paying someone big bucks, you wouldn't want to do it. Okay? Basic principles of value. So there's a number of economic principles that can affect the value of real estate. The most important are anticipation. So according to the principle of anticipation, value is created by the expectation that certain events will occur. So for instance, the value of a house may be affected if rumors circulate that a major employer in the area will be going out of business. We talked about that, right? It's probably going, if they say, oh, this big corporation is moving out of town, moving out of the area, and then we haven't seen this happen in Connecticut in a while, as far as so now there would be, let's just say, an oversupply of houses because all these people that were working in this headquarters are going to move down to Georgia to the new headquarters. Okay. In the same way, a neighborhood may see an increase in property values if a major employer announces that it is moving to the area. Now, I can tell you that is something in today's world, meaning 2025, you have to be careful about saying, because in many cases, there's still so many companies that, they're allowing their people to work out of their home. So you don't always really see that too much. All right. So that's anticipation that something a certain event will occur. That is an economic basic principle of value. The next one is change. Okay? Change, meaning no physical or economic condition remains constant. Real estate is subject to natural phenomena such as tornadoes, fires, routine wear and tear, right? The real estate business is subject to market demands like any other business, and an appraiser must be knowledgeable about both the past and predictable futures of natural phenomena and the behavior of marketplace. It could be something as simple as, you live near the river and it floods it's a good chance that there's a big flood every 100 years, right? So that you need to get flood insurance. Something as simple as that. But the whole point is that change is a principle of when it comes to real estate. Okay. Competition is another one. Take a quick breath here. So And this is a big one to me, usually makes a lot of sense. Competition. The interaction of supply and demand creates competition. Profitable businesses tend to attract competition. For example, the success of a retail store may cause investors to open similar stores in the area. This may mean less profit for all stores concerned unless the purchasing power in the area substantially increases. Whoa, right? Substantially increases. This will happen if more customers are attracted by the new market area for the products to be sold. So remember, competition sometimes is actually good. Like you might see, why is it that a lot of times, we see a Burger King and a Wendy's next to a Popeyes, next to a McDonald's, next to Chipotle, and so forth? Because they know that it attracts people to certain areas. This is the area for all the restaurants, right? Whereas if you had, believe it or not, you have a McDonald's or Burger King all the way out there, 10 miles away by itself, they're probably going to get less business. It's probably that Burger King is probably worth less because of that. So competition is important. Just like properties, right? Properties that are, for instance, near parks, near schools, near hospitals are usually, going to be worth more, easier, more improvements and that sort of thing. Then we have conformity. Basically, that maximum value is created when a property is in harmony with its surroundings. So what does that mean? Well, maximum value is realized if the use of the land conforms to existing neighborhood standards. So in a single-family residential neighborhood, buildings should be similar in maybe design, construction, size, and age. Many parts of the country have experienced a tear-down phenomenon in which a large, expensive new homes replace smaller mid-century homes that is more typical of others in the neighborhood. But the home will not realize its maximum value because it has violated the principle of conformity, at least not until a significant number of conversions has taken place. So, something is easy, or thinking about like the style of homes. So if you have a neighborhood where you have all these colonial homes, should you build, and that they were built 100 years ago and they're historical looking, and now you come in there because you have this 2-acre parcel of land and you say, well, I can build whatever kind of home I want to, and maybe the town allows you to do that in that area, right? Because there's no historical designation, but you build this contemporary home. Will it kind of make sense? No. Will it make your house give its maximum value? Probably not. You probably want to build this, special architecture contemporary home in an area where they're building all this special contemporary architectural homes, right? So, you want to have it conform to the existing neighborhood. It could be something as similar as you're in a neighborhood with all these multifamilies and you build a single family home. Well, yeah, you can do that, but it would probably, that single family home is probably not getting its maximum value. The maximum value would be to build a 2 or 3 family home like all the other homes in the neighborhood. Make sense? All right, contribution. Under the principle of contribution, the value of any part of a property is measured by its effect on the value of the whole parcel. Under the principle of contribution, the value of any part of a property must be measured on the value of the whole parcel. So installing a swimming pool, greenhouse, private bowling alley may not add value to the property equal to its cost, but remodeling an outdated kitchen or bathroom might. Okay. So, what are you really doing to contribute to the value of the property? Okay. Usually it's taking care of remodeling things that are outdated before you say, well, I want to put on an extra bedroom. So if you put on an extra bedroom, but so now you have 4 bedrooms, but you still only have one old bathroom. Well, that contribution of that extra bedroom is probably not going to be worth as much as if you repaired the current bathroom and maybe put a second bathroom on, right? Or maybe once again, like you said, we talked about the roof. The roof is leaking and it's an old slate roof that's going to cost $65,000 to replace, but instead you take the 65,000 and you put in an in-ground pool. Well, you would probably add a lot more value to the property by just replacing that roof. Okay. And then we also have highest and best use. So if you forgot what we were going over, we're basically, I'm going to come back here to the top, the basic principles of value, the number of economic principles that affect the value of real estate. So we spoke about anticipation, change, competition, conformity, contribution. And now this one is highest and best use. The most profitable single use of a property is its highest and best use. The use must be physically possible, legally permitted, economically or financially feasible, and the most profitable or maximally productive property, right? So is its highest and best use physically possible, legally permitted, economically or financially feasible, and the most profitable or maximally productive. So again, the highest and best use can change with social, political, and economic forces. So here we are. We have an example, a parking lot in a busy downtown area, for example. It may not maximize the land's profitability to the same extent that an office building would. And I would tell you, an office building in today's world is probably not the best thing to build, right? Because here we go. On the other hand, if the downtown area has an oversupply of office space, but is short of parking areas, the parking lot may be the most profitable current use of the land. So I try to think of, and I'm not here to pass judgment or to give you ideas exactly of what to do, but what would be the highest and best use of a parcel of land in downtown Hartford right now? For some reason, many people think that it's luxury apartments. Okay. I'm not a fan of rentals at all. I'm not a fan of luxury rentals. I am a fan of helping people build wealth and be able to leave something for their heirs. So my point is, and it's not like I have the ability to be able to do this kind of thing now, the time or the energy or the financial resources, but what about condos? What about actual properties that the everyday person can own and take care of and feel like they have that sense of pride and community and be able to do what they want with it and be able to improve it and benefit from cleaning up the trash around the unit, for making sure that it stays in good shape? I love condos. I think that those are probably the better way to go. And we definitely have way, way, way too much office space, in my opinion, in Hartford right now. And to change them to luxury apartments, I don't think is necessarily helping them out. All right. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now. So, my friends, we went through a lot today. Hopefully, you noticed that. Any questions on some of this stuff? Right. So that's where I'm going to leave it for the class. Right. We're going to leave it at highest and best use. And so Friday, which is going to be Trisha, right? I'm going to ask her to start at increasing and diminishing returns, right? And that's where we're at. But I appreciate you three being in class I mean, is this what it's usually been? Only because I don't come to a lot of the morning classes. Has it been like 2 or 3 people?
No, it's been a lot of people.
Oh,
I
good.
know.
Because
On Tuesdays, it's usually like 2 of us on
Okay.
Tuesdays, but the
Well-
other days we have more. But on Tuesdays, it's like this most times.
Good. Because when it was 10 o'clock and I only saw me and Jason, I was like, man, maybe I should just discontinue the Tuesday classes. But I'm happy to see at least we got 4 of us in here. So that was cool.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I appreciate all of you. So if any